Did you think somebody could die in this submersible?
Absolutely. Even after I was terminated from the company, I felt in myself there's no way I could live with myself if something happened.
It's been nearly 2 years since that underwater submersible imploded as it was carrying paying passengers down to see the wreck of the Titanic.
It's taken 2 years for a clearer picture to emerge from the murky depths, from the debris field of the Titanic that claimed the egg-shaped Titan.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. In the brand new Netflix documentary, by the way, it's dropping on June 11th very soon, in just a few hours actually, a new voice can be heard, that of Bonnie Cole, a bookkeeper and a Seattle native. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, this channel has covered almost 100 videos on the Titan submersible disaster, and this video is going to be a summary, basically a bottom line conclusion of what I think is the most important psychology underlying this disaster from Stockton Rush's perspective. If you find this analysis meaningful, worthwhile, important, necessary, and I do think it does have application right now in the current zeitgeist, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started.
Well, now, a Netflix documentary is detailing precisely what went wrong.
When Bonnie Cole was hired as OceanGate's bookkeeper in 2017, she said, "It was my dream job." A Seattle native, Cole was a CPA who had fallen in love with sea life and scuba diving 4 years earlier, and OceanGate offered her the chance to help with dives at its Everett, Washington headquarters, and to learn to pilot a sub from the company's director of marine operations, David Lockridge.
Many of those warnings from David Lockridge. He's the Scottish submersible pilot who lost his job after telling the CEO it was too dangerous.
Lockridge, according to People, a former diver in the UK Royal Navy who had become an expert pilot specializing in sub-rescues, fixated on the water as a boy, visiting his grandparents on the Isle of Cumbrae off the coast of Scotland. Like Carl and many other OceanGate employees and investors, Lockridge was intrigued by Rush and his mission to make sea exploration more accessible with less expensive vessels. And it's easy to be intrigued by this idea. It was quite original. And that was the fairy tale. And in a real sense, Stockton Rush identified an area, an opportunity for heroism and discovery on Earth that was effectively untapped. And in this venture, he stood to emerge not only as an icon, if he pulled it off, if he could get it right, he stood to emerge as an icon and make huge amounts of money out of providing a gateway into the deep ocean. I've often referred to it as a taxi service down to the Titanic. Stockton was a visionary who was trying to democratize the abyss, says Fred Hagen, a developer who made 2 trips to the Titanic on Titan. That was a noble cause, and I'm quoting from the article in People. It was a noble cause, but sometimes the pursuit of something good can bring out the worst in us, and I think it did here. The Titan submersible tragedy is like a modern update of the Titanic disaster. It's a cautionary tale with one major difference. If the Titanic involved hubris and techno-triumphalism on a collective scale, with many players sharing culpability in what happened, well, with the Titan it seems to come down to one individual above all, Stockton Rush. People's June cover says it all. What really went wrong? Alongside the words that descend, they go from top to bottom, like the Titan, down the cover, is a solitary figure encircled by a titanium dome. Well, it's Stockton Rush. At this point, I think it's fair to also ask, what went wrong with him? Do we know? Do you know? After all has been said, are we able to offer a cogent diagnosis? And this is a psychological diagnosis. What were his motives? Because with all the information out there, we ought to be able to assess his psychology by now and explain what went on with the man as much as the machine. So, can we? In this analysis, we're going to review elements from the astonishing backstory, particularly those related by Stockton's foil, the sometimes acerbic, tell-it-like-it-is Scotsman David Lockridge. I must say, I find him a very likeable, authentic fellow. But as we review the story, I want you to think about it through two dimensions, the dimension of self-gaslighting and the dimension of entitlement. And at the end of it, I want to ask you which dimension is the most significant as it pertains to Stockton Rush.
Worth playing for?
Right, number one, hero worship. A key to understanding Stockton Rush is also a key to understanding ourselves and our own motivations. Who are our heroes? What do we admire in someone? To the extent that someone may admire flawed heroes, dishonest leaders, egotists, and so forth, I think it reveals our own flaws and self-gaslighting. I think Stockton's idolizing of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and James Cameron reveals the path that he wanted, not just fame but celebrity, not just wealth but the top rung, not mere privilege but a larger-than-life existence on the largest possible canvas. And after becoming one of the youngest ever to attain his commercial pilot's license, it must have felt like the world was his oyster. Cut to June 18, 2023, and we see a silver-haired, square-jawed, 61-year-old. He's lost a lot of years, lost a lot of time, and time is running out to establish his legacy. Time was also running out that season. It was the last mission of a miserable year, and besides faults and failures, the unthinkable was starting to happen to someone born into wealth. He was losing all his money. He was coming to the end of his life with nothing to show for it. It seemed to be a question of guts, no glory. And if you want to be a hero, the key ingredient is guts. Be brave, bite the bullet. Although Stockton Rush was clearly wrong to risk other lives that Father's Day, remember this happened on Father's Day, he was with some other brave men, Hamish Harding, P.H. Nargile, and a father and son duo as well. And what I think is easy to miss is that if anyone knew the risks, it was him. And so when they descended, I think he knew the size of the risk he was taking, but apparently felt like he had no choice. We will get to why in a moment, but first let's turn the clock back to 5 years prior. Let's go back to people. Lockridge's conflict with Rush erupted in January 2018 after he shared his concerns in an internal report. Rush, who Cole says idolized billionaire entrepreneurs like Bezos and Musk, referring to them as big swinging dicks, was furious at the perceived lack of loyalty, and I think he wanted to be a big swinging dick as well. He told Lockridge, "I'm sure the industry thinks I'm a fucking idiot. That's fine, but I'm not going to force people to join my religion." That's literally how he was thinking about it, as his religion, perhaps more appropriately a cult. But Rush did sort of force people to join his religion. He fired dissenters and surrounded himself with yes men and women, young kids mostly. What he meant, though, was he wasn't going to waste time trying to convince people. He simply create an environment conducive to a cult instead. And I suspect that is what OceanGate under Rush's stewardship ultimately became. According to people, he fired Lockridge and told Carl she'd be head pilot. "Are you nuts?" she thought. "I'm an accountant." She left as well. And we know the rest. Rush forged ahead with Titan, despite the worrying signs, despite the onboard warning system, despite these sounds of carbon fibers popping, likely weakening the structure of the hull, also known as cyclical fatigue. That brings us to number 2, persistence is futile. How and why during this build-up period to catastrophe, where cyclical fatigue was setting in, think about each time the vessel did a dive, each time more microscopic fibers cracking or popping. How did Stockton remain immune to these multiple warnings? Why did he persist when he wasn't unintelligent? What made him so stupid? What made an intelligent person so silly? Self-gaslighting or entitlement? If I had heard noises like that in a sub, I would never go on it again, says Lockridge. Rush, on the other hand, was promoting his project with infomercials and hired as a guide the renowned Titanic expert P.H. Nargile, whose 35 plus years of experience lent gravitas to the adventure. And I do think Nargile, if Stockton was a maverick and his idea was keeping on and it was inspiring people, Nargile gave an added sense of credibility to everything. And that certainly is an open question. Why did P.H. Nargile, who should have known better, not known better? Surely he wasn't as entitled as the CEO. And so it's perhaps his love for his subject clouded his vision, and self-gaslighting did the rest. Think about it. Number 3, great expectations. Born into wealth and an ancestral line that stretched into the nation's founding. It's pretty impressive, right? Rush, with piercing blue eyes, thick silver hair, and a square jaw, carried an air of the patrician set, according to People. He graduated from Princeton University with a degree in aerospace engineering, built and piloted his own plane and submersible, became a venture capitalist, and married the great-great-granddaughter of a couple who died on the Titanic, a very wealthy couple as well. I think one of the great-great-grandparents was also a founder or owner of Macy's in New York. All of this is very prestigious, isn't it? And we can plainly see Stockton Rush was set up for success. All he had to do was claim it. And yet, frustratingly, it seemed to elude him. It seemed out of reach. And this kind of created a psychological pressure, a pressure to perform, a pressure to show results. And surely the way to get there, to meet these great expectations, was to ignore the pressure, was through persistence, was through dogged persistence. According to People, Rush started OceanGate in 2009 and later began working on a sub-design made of carbon fiber, which is basically experimental, which is lighter and cheaper than the typical titanium or steel. But notice those words, cheaper. Industry experts were skeptical the material could withstand extreme pressure, and weren't they right? Of course, Rush ignored this skepticism. Rush simply persisted even after small-scale prototypes imploded, like with deafening bangs that broke windows. You can see that by 2023, 14 long years after starting out, Rush's company was still struggling, and he needed a breakthrough. He needed to prove himself. Now, what makes you cross that line of common sense and reach for that critical breakthrough when reality is telling you stop? What makes you persist? Is it self-gaslighting or entitlement? Well, what do you think the director of this Netflix doc says? He said, it comes down to Stockton Rush. The decisions he made led to this. It was a cult of personality. If you went against him, you were likely to be out. Very true. Some in the close-knit diving community believe he was certain that he'd make it work eventually and make history too. He was really thinking about himself as a real icon. Stockton took risks and lived outside the box. Fred Hagen, who took 2 trips on the Titan, says, and I really think that is who Stockton wanted to be, someone who was living outside the box. It is ironic, someone who didn't want to be put in a box, put himself in this craft that was like a death trap. It was like a box in itself. And yes, he paid for it with his life. I watched the French Open over the weekend. It was an amazing, historic game. But the bottom line in tennis is that there are lines in the court. The rules of the game are that the ball cannot be over the line. The winner ends up being the player who somehow hits the ball hard and puts spin on it, or shows ingenuity and creativity, someone with terrific mobility, yet keeps his game within the court. And setting boundaries, knowing where they are, is one of the key antidotes to entitlement. And this is the key, according to People. Rush believed the rules didn't apply to him and that there's value in breaking them. And there are other people like that as well. Elon Musk perhaps inspired this psychology, but there are also rules of physics and engineering, and those apply to all of us, according to Monroe, the director of this documentary. Do we know any people around us? Do we know any leaders who feel the rules don't apply to them? Do we accept that rules apply to us, and should we? So which is it, self-gaslighting or entitlement? When someone is gaslighting themselves, it's generally referred to as self-gaslighting. This term describes the process of doubting or denying one's own reality or version of events. It can often be due to internalized self-doubt and self-criticism, but it can also be through reinforcing things like ego and looking at certain things on social media and validating ourselves in that sense. In a world with social media where we can choose the rabbit holes we wish to spend our time in and the echo chambers we want to listen to, self-gaslighting is real. It's unreality that becomes reality, our reality. And I think self-gaslighting feeds into entitlement, especially the blindness of entitlement. The blindness of entitlement refers to a situation where individuals with a strong sense of entitlement are unable to see, think about those words, blind, unable to see, unable to comprehend, unable to understand the impact of their own actions or the needs and perspectives of others. In a way, it makes them almost like a psychopath. They can only see what they want. They can't actually see what matters to someone else. And this lack of awareness can manifest in various ways. Dismissing the efforts of others, ignoring the entreaties of others, as Stockton did in this case, just a lack of empathy, difficulty accepting responsibility. Think about that, where Stockton took passengers on this craft as well and just ignored safety protocols, and then also just refusing to change their behavior. So do you see, this self-gaslighting thing is a key ingredient for the blindness of entitlement. It's both, but of course one more than the other. And in essence, the blindness of entitlement is a state where individuals become so self-centered, so selfish, that they completely lose sight of the world around them and the needs of others, leading to a range of negative consequences for themselves and those around them. So we need to recognize this in ourselves, but also the warning signs in others. And this is important. How should one deal with an entitled person? Well, try to avoid them. But if you can't avoid them, set boundaries for them. And that was what Lockridge was trying to do. Try to educate them on the risks they face. That is what Lockridge was trying to do. But what people around Stockton weren't trying to do that. Because if you don't do this, if you don't try to set boundaries for an entitled person, you may end up paying the price. I'm not going to take it further than that. I will be reviewing this documentary, so look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.